Theology of the Body is expressing what the church has always taught as to what it means to be human.
Welcome to the Be Filled podcast. Together, we will explore the deepest desires of the human heart and how our Creator wants to fulfill your every longing. Join us as we explore the beautiful teaching of St. Pope John Paul II on the theology of the body. We are so excited you're here on the journey with us. Open your heart to be filled. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Be Filled podcast. Today is a very exciting episode. We are actually going to introduce the text of Theology of the Body, and to help us do that, we have a very special guest. We have Father Allen Kirchner with us. Father Allen teaches theology classes and is the chaplain at Springfield Catholic Highschool. So, Father, thank you so much for joining me to help share a little bit about Theology of the Body. Today, we're going to get to hear a little bit of your background and story. And then we have three basic questions that we want to look at before we actually begin studying the text. First of all, what is Theology of the Body in general? We're going to talk about why John Paul II wrote it, and the basic structure or outline of the teaching. So we just felt like Father would be really good at helping us do that. So first of all, Father, if you'd like to share a little bit of your background, and then we'll get to those questions.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Good to be here. So I'm a diocesan priest for this diocese, Springfield, Cape Girardeau, and I was ordained in 2020. But before that, of course, I have a life, and so I didn't just pop out of the sky.
Really?
I came from a family, in Jackson, Missouri, so a smaller town. But growing up, we lived the faith, but kind of a basic, practice of the faith, pretty standard, nothing spectacular. But I always had a real love for the church. And when I was in junior high, I kind of thought about the priesthood after many years of being interested in it. I finally started kind of thinking about it as a real option. And so after high school, I entered the seminary for a year and a half, and then after that period, I left for a while and dated for a good period of time. So I went to the public university, got a degree in education, and really loved the life of college at Southeast Missouri State. And it's really there that I was more formally introduced to Theology of the Body. Of course, when I was in high school, Theology of the Body wasn't new, but it was kind of starting to make its rounds among the high school people, and through like campus ministry and high school ministry. And so I went to public school, but through the youth group was kind of introduced to basic Theology of the Body. It was just like chastity, sort of talks and those sort of things at that point. But in college, I was really more fully introduced to Theology of the Body, to understand it more deeply, and to start to more fully apply it, I guess, to my own life as a college student who was dating, long story short, while I was in college, my girlfriend and I broke up, and eventually I realized that the Lord was calling me back into the seminary. It was Holy Week of, I forget what year it was, but a Holy Week. I had a really profound experience of God's mercy. It wasn't anything spectacular in terms of my sins. It was kind of the same old stuff, but just a more full experience of His mercy, and a sense that He was calling me to give that mercy also. And so I went to the chaplain there at the university and said, "Hey, I think I'm going to go back to the seminary," and of course he just laughed and he said, "Yeah, it's about time." Right. So I think everybody else knew I was called to the priesthood before I really fully consented to it. But it's been a great life. I love being a priest and being here at Springfield Catholic. The high school kids are, they're interesting. They're high school kids, but it's a lot of fun. They make every day different, so it's a lot of fun, and they're really, I think, helping me continue to grow. So.
Oh, that's so great. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And it's just so good to hear kind of your real life experience. And I love just the beauty of you came to the priesthood because you experienced the grace and mercy of God and wanted to share that. And that is just so beautiful and powerful, I think. So, and thank you for everything you do for the high school students. I know they all really respect you and love you dearly. So, you're just doing amazing things, probably more than you'll ever know, really. So planting lots of seeds for sure. So when we were talking earlier, as we were preparing, I was saying that, sometimes it's difficult when people ask you what is theology of the body. It's difficult to kind of boil that down to something really digestible, but also to not water it down because it is so deep and so profound. And I've been kind of working on that myself, trying to figure out like, how can I explain this in a way that's very attractive and not like intimidating too much to people. So what would you say, like when someone asks you, what is theology of the body? How would you respond to that?
Yeah. So, we introduced, I guess, more fully theology of the body in the schools just a couple of years ago. And there were some parents who had some concerns, they weren't too interested in Catholic sex ed, as they saw it. And that's actually like one little tiny portion of theology of the body is really dealing with like the specifics around like chastity and the expression of sexuality, right? So I tell people, the theology of the body is not that. It's not Catholic sex ed at all. Really, it's an understanding of the human person. So, I mean, in as few words as possible, theology of the body is a Catholic anthropology. It's an understanding of what it means to be human, Now, does that include our sexuality? Yeah, because we all have sexuality, whether we're priests or religious or married or single or whatever we're doing in life. God gave us this sexuality as a gift, right? And what a gift it is. And so, I mean, the easiest way to explain it is theology of the body is expressing what the church has always taught as to what it means to be human. John Paul II didn't start anything new, maybe just a new expression of it and a sort of a fresh, updated teaching of what the church has really always taught as it comes to the person. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. That is super helpful. And so I know that he began writing it actually just right before he was elected Pope. Is that correct? Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, and ultimately we can go back to even his younger years as a priest and a bishop, that really he was laying some groundwork, a lot of references that he's making in theology of the body proper. He's made other places too, it's not to discount John Paul II, a great teacher, but he repeats himself a lot in a lot of his teachings, right? And just like any speaker does. And so the theology of the body isn't even really new to John Paul II. He's kind of pulling from things that he's written or said earlier in his ministry. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm actually really grateful. Like in reading the text, I've read through it twice and I'm about to read it for the third time, but I'm actually very grateful that he repeats himself like at the beginning. So it's divided into what we call audiences, right? Because he would deliver these every Wednesday. They were the general audiences. And so he delivered 129 of those audiences. But he kind of does a review at the beginning of each audience, which is really helpful.
Right.
Because I actually need that. I need to like hear it again. And because each audience sort of builds on the last one. And so it goes in order.
And for us, reading it, we could potentially read several audiences in a row, but you have to remember the people receiving it when it was initially given. It may have been a week or two or several, between audiences that he delivered these. And so, it was a necessary step to kind of refresh what we talked about last time so that we can kind of set the stage for where we're going.
Right. Yeah. And just for our listeners, if you don't know, he began delivering these audiences in September of 1979 and concluded them over 5 years later in November of 1984. So it was a very long process in doing that. And I can't even imagine what people were thinking as he was delivering them. I think it's taken quite a bit of time for it to really soak in and for us now to see how important it is for our time right now.
Right.
So
and it is interesting because even you talk to some priests who were in the seminaries in the 80s. They weren't learning theology of the body yet. It hadn't really made the move to the seminaries yet. And even in the early 90s. There was some sort of new teachings on anthropology or fresh teachings on anthropology, but officially theology of the body hadn't yet made it into the seminaries. And, that's no one's fault. That's just the way things work, right? But that's, it's true. It's sort of only now really taking deep root. And I think we're seeing some of the fruit of this now. It's taken some time, but we are seeing fruit for sure.
Absolutely. And in that way, I think it was so prophetic whenever he delivered it, right? So, and that kind of brings us to the next question, which is, why did John Paul II write Theology of the Body? What was he seeing in the world that led him or prompted him to write the Theology of the Body?
Yeah. So, John Paul II was born in Europe in 1920, and so anybody who was alive and alert at that time really experienced a lot of suffering, whether as an individual actually experiencing the suffering or seeing other people suffer through wars, and so this idea of suffering played a really important role in John Paul's understanding of the human person. But he also lived through the sexual revolution, right? Predominantly in the United States, but it had effects everywhere, right? And so this sort of distorted understanding of the human person. And really, I do believe that God gave the church John Paul II when we needed him, because all of the experiences of humanity that he was witnessing really were distorted.
Right.
Of course, he valued relationships and friendships and sort of a diversity of friendships too. He grew up with close friends who were not Catholics, even, many Jewish friends, and he had real deep relationships. And I think he saw the experiences that he was having of relationship were somewhat contrary to what maybe the culture at the time or the world was saying was like a real relationship, right? And so for him to actually teach what does the church say about what the human person is, who we are as humans, what relationships are, what we're called to in that. It was really a response to what was happening in the world, a lot of suffering and confusion.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And, I know some people can be confused about like theology of the body. Like, what does the body have to do with theology? And so I know that was a big piece of what he was addressing too, is that we had lost that understanding of meaning about our bodies and matter in general. It kind of got boiled down to what I can see and what I can understand, taking out mystery, and meaning. And so I think that he was very much defending the meaning of the body through the theology of the body. I don't know if you have any other thoughts about that.
Just contributing to the whole sort of understanding of the person, there was definitely sort of two camps that had developed, and they weren't new. It was, and we really still have them, right? So the materialistic camp, of course, sees the body as just material, and that fades away when we die, and that's it, right? And the human person is just sort of a temporary thing, But then there's also the fideistic approach, which sees everything in the world as bad, right? And so the body is bad, right? The idea of sexuality is bad. The just any matter is bad. Yeah, as you said. And so those two sort of opposing viewpoints are both wrong, right?
Right.
And so John Paul II really says, no, the church stands in the middle of that, right? With both of these being really important things. God's given us this body. God took on flesh,
Absolutely.
If the flesh was bad, God wouldn't have taken on flesh, So, yeah, I mean, he definitely highlights the goodness of the body.
Right. Absolutely. Very good. Thank you so much. That is really helpful, I think, and hopefully that helps our listeners to be maybe intrigued and not afraid of what theology of the body could offer.
Yeah, a lot of big words, but ultimately we can come to understand it, and it can really help us, I think, to know what we're called to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure, you've seen in your work with young people as you're teaching the message of theology of the body, I'm sure you've seen situations in which it does have a big impact. Do you have anything you'd like to share about that as far as how it might have helped some of the kids? Yeah.
And so we, of course, I teach juniors, and we were discussing just recently Ephesians 5, and so right now we're they're in the midst of a class on the church. So we're talking about Ephesians 5 and its relation to Christ and the church, and us as the bride. And so one of the girls, when we first read Ephesians 5, of course, wives, be subordinate to your husbands, and so on, right? And husbands, lay down your lives for your wife. She got caught up on the first sentence, as many people do, right? And she was sort of angry about it, and didn't really fully understand it. So after we talked about it, we talked about the full meaning of the passage and what St. Paul was really meaning there. She ended up actually coming to really understand it and embrace it, And so one of the assignments I give is a paper on one of the images of the church. And so she chose to write on the church as the bride of Christ, and wrote a beautiful paper, explaining the meaning of Ephesians 5 and how it applies to our life, and what that means for us as a church, being as a bride, receiving the love that Christ has to give us, and what that means for her as a future spouse, being a wife and cooperating with her husband, being under his mission, and allowing him to love her. So it was just a beautiful example of how theology of the body can sort of shake us awake a little bit, and then really bring us real peace,
Right.
And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I mean, wow, that's amazing too, that a high school student could have that kind of openness and just humility, because I do think it requires that, that you just have a spirit of openness and willingness and humility to what God wants to show you, to the beauty, and to not be afraid. Again, I keep saying that, but sometimes fear gets in the way. So, the text of Theology of the Body is very lengthy, right? And I wondered if you could just kind of break down the basic structure of his argument, how it's sort of laid out in the text.
Yeah, sure. So, for this is, I think, an editorial type of sort of sectioning that can help us when we're like reading Theology of the Body, right? And so there's two major divisions, and really when we look at Theology of the Body, it's somewhat liturgical in that it begins with the words of Christ, like what Jesus teaches. So we're looking at Christ. John Paul says that Christ appeals to the beginning, right? And so we can dive into what happens with man before the fall, right? And it's surprising because we think before the fall, a few minutes
Right.
or 3 lines of text, right? And John Paul II goes on for several audiences about what it was like before the fall,
Mm-hmm.
And so we go back to the beginning, and then we look at what Christ teaches about love and what it means to be, human and to receive love, and then we move into Christ talking about what is to come, right? The eschaton, talking about the resurrection and teaching that life is eternal, right? And that we don't just fade away. And then after we look at and study the words of Christ, we're given sort of the sacrament, what they call the section, the second main section, the sacrament, talks about how we as humans point to something else too, right? And so we are sacramental in that we are helping each other to experience God in a particular way, right? We're images of something, whether we're married or celibate for the sake of the kingdom, right? All of us are pointing to something greater. Yeah.
Right.
And so that's a very brief breakdown of the text, but a good overview of it would be that it's kind of like when we go to Mass, right? We have readings, we hear the words of God, and then we're given an example of like what we are supposed to do, how we're to love, right? Through the Eucharist. And so this Theology of the Body, we in the first portion read the teachings of Jesus, and then we're given examples of how they apply and what it means for us
Right.
as living in the image and likeness of God.
Yes, very good. You did such a great job just explaining that in a brief way. That is really, really beautiful. And I always point out to people that, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, but the majority of Theology of the Body is about our identity, right? It's about who we are before we get to the activity, right?
Yeah.
Identity before activity, and that we have to know what we were made for in the beginning in order to have direction for our lives. And that was definitely one of the most powerful things to me, was understanding what we were made for, because that informs, what did Jesus come to save, right? What did he come to redeem and restore in us? And that is so important and powerful, because we're all very in tune with the fall. Like we all know and would live that the brokenness, and sin in our lives. So that was just so hopeful and beautiful to me to have direction. What are we shooting for here?
Yeah. And I think, as you said, we don't really know what to do if we don't really know who we are and what we were made to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I encourage anybody really to dive into Theology of the Body because it helps to just know what we're made for. And then living life has, maybe a little bit more meaning, but it also becomes something that we sort of find to be more fun, more interesting,
Absolutely.
when we actually have a deep purpose.
Right. Absolutely. I agree. Well, that was very, very helpful. And I am hopeful that those who are listening will just be really excited about this journey that we're going to go on together. So thank you so much, Father, for being part of this and helping us on the journey. So next episode, we're going to be sharing with you what to expect as we go into the new year. We're going to actually be really studying and digging into the text of Pope John Paul II's Theology of the Body. And so we are really looking forward to continuing and going deeper with you on your journey with the Lord. So until the next episode, we just will continue to pray for you and ask that you would pray for us as well. God bless. Thank you so much for listening. If you have questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. We can be reached by email at befilledpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on social media. We are on Facebook and Instagram. There you can find additional encouragement in between episodes. Also, be sure to check out our show description for links to resources we discuss in the show, as well as questions for deeper reflection. Until the next episode, God bless.